My mom always said February in London has a particular kind of cold. Not the screaming cold of January. Something quieter. More personal. Like the city is leaning in close and whispering something it doesn't want anyone else to hear. I remember the night before the BAFTAs the way you remember a dream you tried to hold onto edges soft, but the center of it? Perfectly sharp. I'd been staying in a flat off Shaftesbury Avenue that week, covering what my editor called the soft stories. Her words. I never thought fashion was soft. I still don't. There's nothing soft about standing in front of 10,000 cameras and knowing every inch of fabric on your body is going to be picked apart by morning. I'd been doing this writing about the royals, about the occasions, about the culture wrapped inside a hemline for nearly 9 years by then. Long enough to know that what people wear to these things is never just what they're wearing. It was already past 11 when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A source. Someone I'd worked with across 3 different royal engagements. She didn't lead with hello. She never did. You should find a position on the South Bank early tomorrow. Near the steps. Don't be late. That was all. I stood there in my dressing gown eating leftover noodles from a paper box and I thought, something is going to happen tomorrow that isn't in any press release. The morning came in grey, the way London mornings like to. The Thames had that pewter-colored stillness it gets in February, not quite frozen, not quite alive, just holding its breath. I got to the South Bank before 8. Which, if you've ever tried to get a decent position near any royal arrival point without press credentials, you understand is not early enough and also somehow too early to be comfortable. There were already people there. Not many. A cluster of women near the concrete balustrade, wrapped in scarves, holding takeaway cups like small prayers. 2 teenagers with a phone on a tripod. A man in a fluorescent vest who worked for the venue doing something with electrical cables and seemed mildly annoyed by all of us. I found a spot that gave me sightline to the steps without requiring me to be either rude or acrobatic, and I waited. The thing about waiting for something you've been told to wait for, but given no details about, is that your brain starts inventing the details for you. I'd covered enough of these arrivals to have a catalog in my head of memorable moments. The year someone's earring caught on a scarf and nearly took out a photographer. The evening a small child broke through a rope barrier and sat on the ground in front of a duchess's car and absolutely refused to move for 4 full minutes. The time a gust of wind off the Thames turned an umbrella inside out at exactly the wrong moment and made every front page in the country by 9 the next morning. February doesn't forgive you, darling. That's what the Thames seemed to be saying that morning. I pulled my coat tighter. And then, the crowd started to shift. It wasn't loud at first. It was a feeling more than a sound, the kind of collective inhale that happens in a crowd when something enters its periphery that the brain registers before the eyes quite catch up. Heads turned. Phones came up. The woman next to me, 50s, sensible boots, Union Jack pin on her lapel that had clearly been there since at least 2012, grabbed my arm without looking at me. "Oh," she said. "Just that." "Oh." I turned. The car had arrived at the lower entrance. Which wasn't where anyone expected. That's the thing no one in the press write-ups mentioned later, she came from the riverside. Not the road approach where the photographers had their positions staked out and their lenses already extended. The riverside, where the light in February sits low and golden and a little brutal, the kind of light that has opinions about you. And she stepped out into it. I've written about fashion for long enough that I've learned to distrust my first reaction. The first reaction is always emotional, not analytical, and emotional reactions make for bad copy. You have to wait for your brain to come online after your gut. Give it a few seconds. Let the shimmer settle. But here's what I'm telling you now, as someone who waited for her brain to come online and it still came back with the same answer: the dress was not performing. That's the only word I have for it. There are outfits designed to be seen architectural, deliberate, constructed for the cameras. Maximalist statements. Armor in silk. I've seen plenty of those and they do their job beautifully and they are forgotten by Tuesday. This wasn't that. It was ivory. Or something richer than ivory, the way old book pages are richer than white. And, the structure of it, the way it moved when she crossed those few feet of open ground before reaching the shelter of the entrance, it moved the way expensive fabric moves when the person wearing it isn't thinking about the fabric at all. It moved because she moved. That's the whole secret of it, and it sounds simple, and it is absolutely not simple. The woman beside me, sensible boots, Union Jack pin, had both hands pressed to her mouth. The teenager's phone was live. I could see the little red dot. The man in the fluorescent vest had stopped entirely with his electrical cable and was just standing there, cable hanging loose in one hand, staring. I don't write gushing pieces. My editor would not publish them, and I wouldn't write them anyway. I think they do a disservice to the subject as much as to the reader. But there are moments in this job where the thing you are witnessing is simply doing something real, and your only obligation is to try to tell the truth of it without either diminishing it or inflating it into something it wasn't. This was a moment like that. Later, much later, in the car on the way back to the flat, reading the first wave of coverage on my phone, I'd see the descriptions. The pearls. The tailoring. The designer name. The heritage thread in the embroidery that someone with more access than me had already identified and traced back 200 years. But that wasn't what the woman with the Union Jack pin saw. She turned to me, eyes shining in the cold, and she said, she looked like she belonged to all of it. Like she always did. I wrote that down. I always write down the things real people say before the official version takes over. My grandmother used to embroider. I say that because it matters to this story, and I didn't understand that it mattered until I was standing in a small archive room off a street in Mayfair 2 days after the BAFTAs, looking at fabric swatches under a light that cost more than my first car, and the archivist, a compact woman with reading glasses on a chain, and the general energy of someone who has personally witnessed at least 4 centuries, pointed to a detail on one of the reference samples and said, "This stitch. This specific stitch. There are 14 people in the country who know how to do it correctly." I asked her how many were still practicing. She paused. 7. On a good day. The BAFTA ceremony itself I watched from a press pen inside the venue, which is a sentence that sounds glamorous and is in practice a lot of standing near a pillar with a lanyard digging into your neck, straining to see over someone else's equipment bag. The business of covering these events from inside is more unglamorous than anyone watching from their sofa would believe. There are no moment of arrival details from inside. You get the room. You get the light. You get the hum of 2,000 people dressed in their finest deciding whether to get a second drink before sitting down. But, the room was something that night. I've covered the BAFTAs in years where the whole thing felt like obligation. A duty engagement dressed up in black tie. The kind of event where everyone is present and no one is quite there. February can do that to you. The year is barely a month old and already asking things of you, and you show up and smile and nod and count the hours. This wasn't one of those years. There was an atmosphere in that room that I felt before I understood it. Something charged. The way a stage feels charged before a performance that everyone in the building has silently agreed is going to be something they'll remember. I've thought since about what created it. I have a theory. It was the clothes. Not just hers. Everyone's. There was something that season about the decision, collective and, apparently uncoordinated, which means it was actually deeply coordinated in the invisible language that fashion speaks, to reach for something with weight. With history. With what you might call intention. Not nostalgia. Not costume. Something else, the deliberate choice to let what you wear carry memory without being imprisoned by it. Here is what I know about the dress now that I've done the reporting. The ivory fabric came from a mill in Yorkshire that has been weaving textile for the British market since before the railway reached the town it sits in. The mill is small enough that its annual output would fit in a medium-sized warehouse. The people who run it are the third generation to do so. The woman who answered the phone when a colleague tried to reach them for comment said, very politely, that they didn't do press. The embroidery, that's where it gets complicated and beautiful. The pattern isn't decorative in the way ornament is decorative. It tells something. Floral motifs that aren't generic florals, specific species, specific arrangements, specific symbolic grammar that someone had to make a series of decisions about. Which flower? Which placement? Which scale? These are not neutral choices. They are a language written in thread by hands that understood both the language and the weight of the occasion it was being worn to. I asked the archivist in Mayfair what she thought of it. She took her reading glasses off, which I'd learned meant she was about to say something she considered important. It speaks to continuity, she said. Not in the sentimental sense. In the architectural sense. The kind of continuity that isn't about repeating the past. It's about acknowledging that you stand somewhere in a long line of something. And that the line matters. And that knowing it matters changes how you stand. I sat with that for a while. Changes how you stand. There was a moment I caught it, and I know I caught it because I wrote 3 words in my notebook at the time, and the 3 words were, she knew exactly when she moved through a particular configuration of lights near the stage, and the embroidery caught the light in a way that made the pattern visible across the room. Not glaring. Not demanding attention. Just suddenly legible, the way certain things are legible only when the conditions are exactly right. The woman seated near me, a film critic, formidably dressed, with the particular stillness of someone who watches things for a living, turned to look. Didn't say anything. Turned back. But she turned. That's all it takes sometimes. Someone who watches things for a living stops watching the stage and turns. The pearls. I have to talk about the pearls because they're the thing everyone else focused on, and I don't want to dismiss them, but I also want to say something slightly different about them than what I've already read. Pearls have a complicated history in royal dress. They carry weight, literal and metaphorical. They've adorned portraits and ceremonies and mourning clothes and wedding days. They mean different things depending on the context and the piece and the person wearing them and, crucially, how they're worn. Worn correctly, pearls don't announce themselves. They're not a statement. They're punctuation. These were punctuation. The scale of them, the placement, the restraint, all of it said, I chose this deliberately, and I chose it to complete something, not to add to it. There's a distinction. An outfit that has everything added to it is different from an outfit that is completed by its final element. One is accumulation. The other is architecture. I called my grandmother that night. She still embroiders. Slower now. Her hands don't agree with her the way they used to. But she does it. She has a piece she's been working on for 6 years, a tablecloth that is allegedly for a special occasion, though the special occasion has never been named. I told her about the dress. About the stitch. About the 14 people and the 7 who are still practicing on a good day. She was quiet for a moment. Someone cared, she said. That's what that means. When you use a stitch like that, you're choosing something that costs care, not just money. Those aren't the same thing. They're not. I keep thinking about all the hands the dress moved through before it moved through that room. The weavers in Yorkshire. The embroiderers who are 7 on a good day. The people who made decisions about symbols and placements and what story to tell in thread about a woman attending an event in February in a city that was, for one night, paying attention to something other than its own exhaustion. Care. That's the word my grandmother used. Someone cared. This is the part of the story I almost didn't include. Not because it isn't true. Because I couldn't decide for a long time whether it belonged, whether it was a story about fashion, or a story about something underneath fashion, which maybe is always the real story anyway, and the fabric is just the surface you can actually describe. I'll tell it and you can decide. There's a side door at the venue, one of those unmarked exits that exists in every large public building to route the practical machinery of an event away from the ceremonial parts. Staff. Equipment. The catering. The quiet necessary infrastructure that keeps the visible parts possible. I found myself near it during one of the interval reconfigurations, the 20-minute shuffling period when the room reorganizes itself between segments and everyone is briefly in motion and the strict choreography relaxes just enough for people like me to move into positions we'd technically have no business occupying. The door was propped open 3 inches. Standing beside it, in the particular stillness that belongs to people who've been trained to stand for long periods without fidgeting, was a member of the security detail. Not royal protection, I know those faces, roughly, but venue security. Ex-military, I thought, or still current, by the posture. 50s. A face that had done a great deal of weather. He was looking at something across the room. I followed his line of sight. She was standing near a group, talking, head tilted slightly the way it tilts when someone is genuinely listening and not performing listening. The ivory dress under those warm amber lights. The pearls. The stillness that lives inside movement. The guard didn't say anything. He wasn't smiling exactly. It was something quieter than a smile. A particular expression that I've seen on the faces of people who have guarded things of value for a long time and have developed a feeling, not sentimental, not soft, something more structural, about what they are guarding. He noticed me noticing him. Neither of us said anything. I moved on. But I kept thinking about that face. That expression. The word that kept surfacing for it was custodian. Not in the janitorial sense. In the ancient sense. The sense that means keeper. Someone who understands that the thing in their care belongs not just to the present but to before and after it, and that their job is merely to stand in the middle of that long line and hold it steady. There's something about British heritage, about the particular way it lives and breathes in this country, that I've been trying to articulate for 9 years of covering these occasions. It's not pride exactly. Not the loud, flag-forward kind. It's something quieter. More complicated. Almost reluctant, sometimes. It lives in small moments. A Yorkshire mill that won't do press. 7 embroiderers. A guard at a side door with a face full of something he didn't say. And a woman in ivory standing in amber light who understood, on some level that doesn't need to be stated, that she wasn't just wearing a dress. I got outside around 11:30. The Thames was black and bright with the reflections of the South Bank, and the air had that particular bite that February insists on maintaining even when the evening wants to be gracious. A group of people were on the walkway, maybe 20, maybe 30, the way crowds thin and gather on the South Bank at night. Some of them were looking at the building. Waiting, the way people wait outside venues, not with tickets, not with press credentials, not with access. Just there. Just choosing to be near the thing rather than away from it. There was a girl, maybe 15, maybe 16, sitting on one of the concrete benches, a big parka, a phone in both hands, showing something on the screen to the woman beside her who was probably her mother. The mother was leaning in to see. I didn't mean to look over their shoulders. It was accidental proximity. The screen showed the shot that had already gone everywhere by then, the arrival, the riverside steps, the February light doing its brutal golden thing. The girl said to her mother, in the voice of someone stating a fact, "She looks like she's not afraid of anything." The mother considered this. "No," she said. "She looks like she was afraid and decided it didn't matter." I kept walking. I thought about that for a long time. Afraid and decided it didn't matter. There is a version of this story where the BAFTA appearance is a fashion story. Designer. Fabric. Silhouette. Pearls. Heritage thread. All of that is true and documented and real and matters in its own right. But the version I keep returning to is smaller and harder to write. It's the version where the dress is the surface and the surface tells a truth about what's underneath. About the specific kind of courage it takes to stand in a room like that, in a light like that, after a year like the one that had just passed, and where something that says, "I chose this deliberately. I am still here. The things I care about are still the things I care about." You can't write that in the fabric description. You can't capture it in the millimeter measurements of the embroidery. You can't source it and credit it. But you can see it. That guard at the side door saw it. His face said so. I had dinner by myself afterward, at a small place near Waterloo that does very good pasta and doesn't ask too many questions about what you're writing in your notebook. I ordered a glass of something red and sat by the window and watched the city go about its late-night business, and I thought about continuity. About what it means to be part of a line. Not at the end of it. Not at the beginning. Somewhere in the complicated middle of it, where your job is to understand both directions, where it came from and where it might go, and to hold that understanding lightly enough that it doesn't crush you, but firmly enough that it means something. The mill in Yorkshire. The archivist in Mayfair. My grandmother's tablecloth for an unnamed occasion. 7 embroiderers on a good day. A guard with a custodian's face. A girl on a bench who said she looks like she's not afraid of anything, and a mother who said something better. February in London. The city leaning in close. Whispering. The piece I eventually filed was not this piece. The piece I filed was 900 words, ran on a Wednesday, had a headline I didn't write, and covered the designers and the heritage credentials and the pearls and referenced 3 other notable BAFTA appearances for context. My editor liked it. The comments were mostly civil. It was shared a reasonable number of times. It did its job. But there's always the other version. The one you don't file. The one that lives in the notebook and the walk back along the South Bank and the conversation with your grandmother and the red wine by the window at Waterloo. This is that version. I want to tell you about a woman named Rose. I met her the morning after the ceremony, on the South Bank again, because I'd gone back. I'm not entirely sure why I went back. The event was done. The photographs were everywhere. There was nothing left to report. But the light was different in the morning. Softer. Less opinionated. And I suppose I wanted to see the place without the occasion in it, just the steps, just the river, just the ordinary February morning going about its business without ceremony. Rose was feeding pigeons. She was maybe 70. Practical coat. Good shoes. The particular self-possession of women who stopped caring what anybody thought of them sometime in their late 50s and haven't looked back. She had a paper bag of breadcrumbs and she was distributing them with calm authority, as though she'd been doing it for years, and the pigeons knew this and respected it. I was standing nearby doing nothing in particular, which is how I ended up in a conversation. She asked if I'd been to the ceremony. I said I'd covered it. She asked what that meant exactly, and I explained the press pen, the lanyard, the equipment bag problem. She nodded like she understood all of that. Then, she said, I watched it on the telly. The whole thing. My husband said, "Why are you watching that? You don't care about films." I said, I don't care about the films. I care about the dresses. She threw a handful of crumbs. He still doesn't understand that those are different things. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. The pigeons settled and dispersed and settled again. She'd been watching royal occasions on television since the coronation, not the recent one, the one before it. She spoke about these things the way some people speak about geography. Long familiarity. An intimate knowledge of the terrain. There are some of them, she said, who wear the clothes. And there are some of them that the clothes wear. And, very occasionally, not often, maybe a handful of times in your life if you're lucky, there's someone where you can't tell. Where the two things have found each other so completely that it just looks like a person. She seemed to be deciding whether to continue. That's when it means something, she said. When you can't find the seam. I've been writing about this world long enough to be skeptical of the romance it generates. The mythology. The way certain moments get calcified into legend by the sheer volume of people who watched them. I've seen events that were perfectly ordinary become watershed moments because enough people needed them to be. I try to hold that skepticism carefully. Not cynically. There's a difference. But Rose didn't need a watershed. She wasn't manufacturing legend over her pigeon bread. She was just a woman who had been paying attention for decades and had developed a discernment about the things she was paying attention to. When you can't find the seam. That's craft. That's the highest compliment you can pay anything made by human hands, that the making has become invisible, that the intention has fully inhabited the material, that the two things have found each other. The dress is in a record somewhere now. Archived. Photographed from 7 angles by people whose job it is to catalog such things. The pearls are back wherever pearls go between occasions. The Yorkshire mill has already moved on to whatever it weaves next. The ceremony itself has already receded into the category of completed events, which is the fate of all ceremonies, which is actually their function. They happen. They do the work of being moments. And then, they step back and let time start moving again. But, here's what February keeps: the woman with the Union Jack pin whose eyes went shiny in the cold and said she looked like she belonged to all of it. The guard at the side door with the custodian's face. The girl on the bench who said not afraid of anything, and the mother who said something truer. My grandmother, somewhere in her house, working a needle through fabric for an occasion she hasn't named yet. And Rose, with her pigeons and her bread and her 60+ years of paying attention, who put her finger on the thing I'd been trying to say since the Riverside steps and the February light and the moment when the dress moved because she moved and not the other way around. When you can't find the seam. I filed my 900 words. They were good words. They did what 900 words do. But, walking back through the Waterloo morning, coffee in hand, lanyard finally off, I kept thinking about seams. About the invisible joins between a thing and its meaning. Between a person and the history they carry. Between the made object and the intention that moved through the hands that made it. 14 people in the country know a specific stitch. 7 practicing it on a good day. 7 small fires of an old knowledge, kept burning against the argument that it doesn't matter, that no one notices, that the world moves too fast for that level of care to be legible. 7. Enough. Someone in that room noticed. A custodian at a side door. A journalist at a press pen. A grandmother on the telephone. A girl with a theory about fear. An old woman with pigeons who has been watching since before I was born and has developed a vocabulary for the things she watches that I am still, 9 years in, trying to learn. The dress was not performing. That's what I wrote in my other notebook. The real one. The one that doesn't get filed. The dress was not performing. The person inside it had decided that the year before didn't matter as much as what came after it. She wore that decision. You could see it in how she stood. You could see it in how the light hit the thread. You could see it in how the room turned. February in London. Cold that leans in close. The city whispered something that night. I think it said, "Still here. Still here. Still here."